would like to explain a little bit what I'm talking about, because the name of my presentation might be a bit confusing. So I will talk about community-based sanitation only in Indonesia. And for those who are not so familiar with the community-based sanitation approach from BORDA, I put a little remark here only. This is very, very brief. So the approach is basically community-based, as the word. So we include the communities in all the project cycle. And one main institution that is established is the so-called community-based organization, who is taking care of the operation and maintenance afterwards. And also there are user fees, normally there should be, in order to fund or finance operation maintenance. And from the technical point of view, we use the DEWAT system. I don't know if everybody is familiar with this, I hope so. And for CBS projects, we have two different kinds in Indonesia. The first one is the so-called Simplified sewage system, so where we have a pipe where the wastewater is collected and treated in the DEWAT system later. And the other one is the community sanitation center type. So there we have sanitation centers where we have bathing, toilets and other laundry facilities and so on, which people can use. And there are also mixed systems. So just for your understanding what we are talking about. And when we have a look, very, very brief, at a project cycle, you have the implementation part. We can also include planning. I just put some really, really simple wording here. And the other one is the post-implementation, how we call it. And I would like to focus on implementation phase, a little bit on the infrastructure, and a little bit on the capacity building, but not too much, just to give you just to give us a link how things might be connected, how implementation and post-implementation is connected, especially when we talk about O&M and monitoring and evaluation. So what is the framework, and why is Indonesia always a bit special when we talk about post-implementation? There's one reason. We have been lucky, as Bernd already mentioned, to have some pilot projects, 2003, 2004 in Indonesia, where we implemented the CBS projects. And for different reasons, this approach was replicated on the national level. So in cooperation with the Indonesian government and other stakeholders as well. And the program is called SANIMAS, which stands for Sanitation by Communities. I don't go too much into detail, but since then there have been different programs in Indonesia, various stakeholders, ADBs involved, IDB, other stakeholders as well. But the SANIMAS approach, the CBS approach, is still existing. And there is an estimation, I just got this from our friends from Sydney. We're working with ISF, Institute for Sustainable Futures, at the moment on topics like this. And they gave me this number that there are 13,000 DEWAT systems implemented since we started. Not all by us, not all BORDA. So there are different stakeholders who also implement at the moment, or did implement. And when we look into the future, or where we are now, the national planning, the Indonesian government planning, aims for 100% sanitation access in the next 4 years, so it's quite optimistic. Anyways, we are not losing our jobs. So we estimate also, we don't really know, just estimate from the finance they announced, that this means 2,000 DEWAT systems per year. Also probably implemented by different stakeholders. To give you an idea on what level we work, which is already quite high for a quite small organization, so roughly or approximately we implement 200 to 300 systems every year. Just to give you the idea what the demand is, what we can do, and what is probably not done yet. So, and yeah, we heard a lot about scale, so I would be so brave to say this is scale. In Indonesia we have scale. So I just put very roughly the different steps from pilot to good and best practice standardization up to integration into national policies. So now we talk about large or nationwide dissemination. And the problem is, can we cope with that? Can we cope? We all aim for large scale, we aim for scale, but what do we do with that? So how do we deal with that? So I put this here. Yeah, this large demand is a bit contradicting to the capacity of the implementing agencies or institutions, organizations, whatever, even the government. So you imagine Indonesia is quite big, so the north to south is I think 3,000 kilometers, west to east is 5,000 kilometers. Just imagine the size of the country, the different cultures and everything. Then you imagine the money you need, the people you need to train, and the systems you need to implement on site. So just what infrastructure, what logistics you need for that. Yes, and when we look into infrastructure, there's always the question quantity against quality. So I think especially governments tend to just click implementation numbers to fulfill the whatever goals, standard, rather than looking into the quality. So this is a little bit what is contradicting here. And we heard today already from Philip also, when we look, no sorry, I'm sorry. Yes, and these issues we face here, the challenges from the implementation side, would also be possibly affect the post-implementation phase. Because if we have less quality in implementation, we will face sooner or later problem with O&M. So if there are any bad quality concrete systems or whatever, so what will the communities do with this later? So this will be an O&M issue sooner or later. Yes. So I just put this here to visualize. How do we make sure that implementation issues do not affect post-implementation operation maintenance? Is this still sustainable if we implement a lot just for the sake of implementation? So now I come to prefab that was mentioned by Philip already. So what we've done a couple of years ago in Indonesia, we developed a prefabricated DEWAT system. So it is a fiber system, a DEWAT system made of fiber. And now we have, I think, 3 companies in Indonesia already that are certified to manufacture these systems. We are working closely with one of them, or we are basically implementing infrastructure from one supplier. And I just want to mention, it's not so important for this, but this is also a sector development. This was also mentioned by Philip. So we managed somehow to establish a DEWATS market. And this all sounds good, also just for your feedback. It's not always easy, because if you do good work, you have people who copy, and then you can get into big trouble, because there is a risk that the reputation of your system will decrease, just for thinking. So anyways, the positive effect of these prefab system is still that we can reduce construction time. They are fabricated in a factory, and then we can just ship them somewhere or transport wherever necessary. And what's most important, we can guarantee a certain quality, which then again will hopefully decrease operation maintenance risks. So this is from the technology side on the implementation phase. And another approach we are applying in Indonesia is the application of social standard operation procedures. So this is also linked to the CBS approach, which is community-based or community-focused. And with these SOPs, which have to be applied in each project, so there is also like a quality check we implemented to make sure that this is done. They comprise, I put some examples here, like CBO formation, legalization, an operator is already selected, there is a planning, user fee schemes are set up, there's trainings for operators and users, and now we also have a link, or we have an information towards the local government that projects are implemented. So it's not just informing them, but informing on the details, so where is the location, and so on, and also giving the communities the opportunity to contact the local governments. And I will come to this later, there is an agency in between which supports this communication or interface. The agency is called Aksansi, is an organization I will talk about in a minute. So what we hope to achieve with this is more ownership for the communities, of course capacity development for future O&M, and also raising awareness towards the local governments for the importance of these projects and operation maintenance. So this was from the implementation side. I would now talk a bit more in detail about the post-implementation itself. So what are challenges? And again, I refer to what we heard today already. Also in Indonesia, there is no real regulation on the post-implementation, on the O&M tasks and responsibilities, especially not referring to the local governments. So this also means at the moment there is no standardized or institutionalized operation maintenance scheme or system. So as things are working how they work, there is no clear direction yet. And our experience is also a little bit due to this probably, that often governments assume O&M should be done by the communities and that's it, we are out. We heard that today also already, so we are out somehow. Anyways, reality is a bit different, so I put a table here. This is from a WSP study we conducted in 2011. It's not complete, it's just to give you an idea, showing what communities can do, what they maybe can do and what they cannot do. So it's important to realize that there are different layers of O&M or of capacities. So and what we did, or what I'm convinced about for Indonesia is that O&M should be done by the communities in cooperation with the local governments. So we call this co-management. Nevertheless, since there is no, as I said, no institution yet or whatever, no government institution, we are working together with Aksansi. This is an association and at the same time one of our partner organizations. And Aksansi is the association for all the CBOs, so for all the community-based organizations in each of the CBS projects on sanitation throughout Indonesia. So Aksansi started in 2006, quite small also. And I put the latest figures here. I always have to ask how many branches we have today. So it's 28 branches now, all over Indonesia. And approximately, Aksansi is serving the needs in terms of technical, social, institutional aspects for about 2,000 communities, CBOs, and a number of governments as well. So what do they do? As I said, they provide services, technical, social, institutional services. They have expertise, so if the communities or the local governments have questions concerning operation maintenance, they have a call center. There's also an SMS scheme set up at the moment. They do capacity building, so they train operators. There's a biogas task force, so if there are any issues with the biogas, they support the utilization of biogas. They also train. They do rehabilitation, not on a very large scale at the moment, not yet, but they do. And they also, coming back again to this interface that I think Philip mentioned that we need, or somebody else, they facilitate meetings, stakeholder meetings. So they make sure there is a communication, there is a bridging between communities and governments. And of course, for this co-management, they make sure, I come to this in a minute again, that this is really done in a way. Other things Aksansi is doing to support their future work also, and I talk about this also in a minute, is data management for the communities, so all the data that is related to the project, monitoring, evaluation, and they do various promotion and events. So this is Aksansi, this is what they do, and one part is co-management, the main task or most important one. So as I said, Aksansi was growing and it took a while, but now there is a recognition on national governmental level of Aksansi on the work they do. So I have hope things are improving, and my hope and a little bit my concern is that sooner or later it will go like with the Sanimas approach, with the implementation itself, also for the co-management. So at the moment we are thinking how we prepare ourselves for the peak when it starts, so when things just explode again like it was with Sanimas before. So anyways, by now, from the formal side, we only have 5 MOUs. It doesn't sound a lot, but I can tell you it was a lot of work to get there. So anyways, as I said, there is an interest and demand, obviously, so I think it will increase sooner or later. So Aksansi managed to have 5 local government MOUs by now. And the contributions put down in these MOUs, they vary a lot, so it depends also on the staff you talk to, on the commitment of individuals in a way. But anyways, there is a finance or co-finance contribution to operation maintenance, more in terms of trainings, meetings, publication and things like that, not so much about paying tools for the operator and things like this. It's more on a, how do I say, on a side level, co-financing. And what they also do, they provide space for the Aksansi branches. So some of the branches are not a real office like we would think, but they have a room in the government buildings. So this is what they also do, in order to make sure that communication ways or accessibility to Aksansi is guaranteed. So I put some findings here. This is of course only short, but some main points, what we learned. So these co-management should not be set up after all is done, but it should at least be think about before you go to the large scale. As I said, sooner or later we will have, I know that, we'll get really big. The question is when and how we solve the situation. So learn from us and prepare early enough. And on the other hand, when we are on a good way with this, it needs very intense awareness raising for governmental institutions to understand this. So as I said before, they tick the boxes, implemented, done. So, but this, until it's through, it needs time and really a lot of discussion, talking, and convincing. So another topic I would like to focus on is also related to post-implementation, also to Aksansi, is monitoring and evaluation. And I know this always sounds a little bit boring, and I thought the same somehow, but the more I'm into this, I'm working on this topic with my team, the more I really understand the importance of that. So also to give you a background, there is no structured, institutionalized or systematic monitoring scheme in Indonesia. There is some things are done also by the government, it's also starting in a way, but there is no systematic one point. You imagine the 30,000 projects I mentioned before. This also means there is no access to comprehensive data. There is data, there is also a national database online, but I don't know how it works. So it's empty somehow, the rest I don't really understand, so it's not comprehensive or it's not really useful. Anyways, because of this, Aksansi is doing monitoring because the data is used for different or is needed for different purposes. So the first one is to find out how is the situation nationwide or in one location in order to be able to steer O&M somehow, to see where the problems are. Second is, of course, to inform. If you want to convince a local government to work together on co-management, you need information. You need good examples from other locations and so on and so on. So it's informing. Also, when we think about CBO's needs for support in O&M, of course, there's also data needed to lobby their interests, especially to say what's not working, or why it's not working. Besides, and we're working on this at the moment also, data is important for follow-up actions. We call it troubleshooting. There are probably different words for that as well. So what we did just before I came here is we analyzed the database and we put all the issues we found. It doesn't mean that this is all a big deal, but we put all the issues that are kind of obvious from the database and from other information, and we will see what we do with that. So this would not be possible if we would have no monitoring. Yes. Besides, also, of course, not forget that data is also useful for trainings. Yeah, to be more aware of the situation in the field and maybe to adapt your training modules for your staff or even for the communities, for the operators. And what we also do with the information from the monitoring we exchange in Indonesia and our partner network, I think also in Southeast Asia, and I always get questions from the colleagues from the other regions also about Indonesia. So this is really, knowledge is power somehow. That's why we do monitoring. Just very roughly also to give you an idea about what Aksansi is doing related to monitoring. So normally the monitoring is conducted around 1 year after implementation. This has also to do with the prefab system, because the company who produces is giving a guarantee for 1 year, not only for 1 year but for certain things within the first year that could come up. So this is a little bit related to this. Probably it would be necessary to have monitoring later again, but at the moment we cannot do this. There is no capacity, there is no funding. So, and there are different types of monitoring. One is quite comprehensive, quite long, very covering many different topics. And then I put here a more slim monitoring. This is to complete data. For instance, if their addresses are missing, contact persons, or only less important things, where you not need necessarily to do a bigger monitoring, we do a slimmer monitoring. So this is like just a part of this. Or also when there is demand from a community or a local government. Yes, and the current data that is in the database is about 2,800 data sets from 2,500 locations. So why are there more data sets than locations? Sometimes we have 2 monitoring, 3 monitoring for 1 location, because there were different monitorings in the last year. That's why I would advise you to also think about monitoring early enough. And we had a bit of an issue also to put all these different monitorings together into one database. It's a lot of work. You can imagine different monitoring forms, bring them into one file in a way. Yes, and about 700 locations have been monitored so far. So you see there is overlapping also. So, and this is just to show you a little bit, to make you a bit more aware of what monitoring steps are. I call it the monitoring cycle from Aksansi. And I put here, and this is important for me, all that has been set up in Indonesia in our office or in Aksansi office is learning by doing. So we have no example, we have no books that we can read. On this scale, everything that happened somehow naturally, or with thinking and with steering in a way. So we are now, I can say, we are really in a professional direction where we can handle things, where we divided the different steps. Just to give you some ideas, on the top you find the different steps, and below mostly the tools that would be important for that. So just when we look at the data record, the monitoring itself, it starts with planning. Who is going where, when, which locations, things like this. So we have a flow chart to coordinate the monitoring planning only in our network, because we have 2 other organizations. They maybe have interest in getting certain data and things like this. This is to optimize time, costs, and so on, human resources. And then when we look at the forms themselves, this is a lot of work to set this up. You heard that today also. What indicators do we need? And things like this. So it sounds quite simple here, that's what I'm trying to say actually. But setting up a monitoring form to make sure that you do not have a new one in the next 2 years, where you would need to change your database again, it needs a lot of thinking. And we adapted our form after we introduced the prefab system. So when we started with this, it's a new technology, it's more or less comparable, but you also need to think about other indicators. When we look at the data processing at the database, also just some short feedback. Currently we're working with Excel, because for different reasons Access, I'm not an expert, Access seems not to be appropriate, because the data, if you have large amounts of data sets, it's limited. On the other hand, Excel will be limited sooner or later too, so I'm not really sure what we are doing with this. On the other hand, we are not a professional IT company. You also have to consider this. We have no specialized person in IT, so everything that we have set up is done by my staff, also by learning by doing. The next step is the evaluation, and I would point out here to understand that there's a difference between monitoring and evaluation. This is also, we always say monitoring, evaluation, yes, but there is a big difference. Monitoring is kind of collecting data. Evaluation needs first analysis. Yeah, this is also not just done. You need to think about how you do that. And evaluating is, yeah, how do we read the data, yeah? And to be able to do this, yeah, we introduce a classification, a scoring. And one of my staff is in Indonesia also since 3 years. Since 3 years, we constantly improving the scoring and this evaluation, just to give you an idea. So, and the last one is the data output. This means, yeah, what do we do? How do we distribute? How do we communicate? Yeah, we have reports that we send to local governments for feedback, also to the communities. And within our network itself, and I put here just as an example, we also have mapping, GIS mapping. Also for this, it's not just done, you need some skills. So this is to give you an overview, and I put a few findings on monitoring and evaluation. I think some I mentioned already. Yes, set up the infrastructure as soon as possible. Not after you have 300 locations and then you need person and volunteers to type days and days just for data input. It also is a risk, you know. It's not only that it's a lot of work, but if you have to type endless data, it's, how to say, there's the risk of failure, you know, of wrong data being put in the database. Yes, define the purpose of monitoring and evaluation. Why do you want to do this? Because everything else will be related to this. Your indicators, your forms, your evaluation. Also consider different types of system, yeah? As I said, we have 2 or 3 types of the DEWAT CPS system. Now we have the prefab system. Also consider language issues, not in the country itself, but we also see this in the BORDA network. We're working in English basically here. But in Indonesia, the people I send to the field, not all speak English, especially in a more remote area. So this is also can be quite an issue if you're not really think about before. And also, yeah, cultural conditions, yeah. So how do we do an interview? How do we do this? Things like this. And then crucial also the data quality. I'm not going into details, just to make you aware. We also had a really good training with the ISF guys from Australia only on data quality. And it made me also more aware how important this is for the quality management, yeah. The data you have is the thing you work with. As I said, knowledge is power, but if your knowledge is based on I don't know, on low quality, it is not useful. Evaluation, I put complex, yeah, because it's true and it's a lot of work. And then some recommendations from my side. Standardize the procedures for each of the monitoring steps in your office, yeah? So for the planning, preparation, sampling, how do we do the data entry, when, time frame, things like this. And if possible, set up a assessment scheme, yeah? Who is checking the data quality from time to time? Because if there's somebody sitting on the laptop and doing it every day like you did it yesterday, and nobody realized there's an issue, then you have a big problem in your database, which will not be representative for maybe this issue that has been typed in. And also I mentioned this, yeah, you need specific capacity building, yeah? On IT, on technical social aspects for the system itself. How do we do interview and things like this? It's not just done. You really need to train your people, and this needs preparation, needs a lot of time too. And then schemes, software, and so on should be flexible for future changes. Yeah? If you change your system, you have to change your database, and so on and so on. And also be aware that data increases, and it may be increase exponentially. So, as I said, I'm also not really sure how we would handle this with the Excel at the moment, or for the future. Yes, and as I mentioned before, we need to communicate that we need long-term monitoring. So not only one or two times and after a short time after implementation, but after 3 years, after 5 years. I think this is absolutely not discussed in the network, in the sector. Not really everybody knows, but it's still a long way, and I think we need to communicate this to the decision makers. That's all. Thank you.
What I looked up was the political program that the current president, Jokowi, used for campaigning last year, the Nawacita. And there is, I think, a fairly strong orientation towards really making at least some headway towards improving the living conditions for poor Indonesians. And there was an enormous polarization in the political sphere of Indonesia last year. It was really two camps at loggerhead. And I think that there is a certain, let's say, macro-political momentum that could be conducive to what BORDA and its partners are doing in Indonesia. At least on the very strategic level, it's very firmly anchored in the policies. So perhaps as a bit of relief, the Nawacita says that 80% of coverage in 2019. So you get a little bit of relief.
No, they communicate 100.
They communicate 100 now. Okay, they're devils. They communicate to different things.
But they also laugh when they say that.
Yeah, they laugh when they say that. I think even 80% would be quite a challenge. But I think there is also some positive momentum in really getting things into a doable framework. And I think there are some experiences on which you might be able to draw. I'm quite cautious saying this, but and that would be the program for the most disadvantaged families, the PKH program, which has had a vast coverage and which also tried to build the institutional infrastructure. It's a sort of conditional cash transfer program. I do not know how familiar you are with this type of stuff. So people who enroll in certain health programs of the government, like having this regular examinations of pregnant women, and then having regular examinations of babies and small children, and when children grow up a little bit, sending them to school regularly, and so by giving cash transfers, giving a strong incentive to participate in this type of programs. And I think the target audience of this program, which is a very huge program, there are now in the sphere of about 30, 40 million participants. The target audience, I think, has quite some overlapping with the target audience of those people who have not access to decent sanitation. And they have got quite some way in putting the IT infrastructure in place. It was a giant challenge to do that, to unify the different databases, to target all the programs, to get the data processed, to weed out all the problems and so on and so on. And I think if you could perhaps link with this tendency, because it's also on the political steering level, it's quite close. The indicator for sanitation is under the heading of the Kartu Sehat. So there you are quite close institutionally. And if I don't say that's easy or that it is doable in the short run, but if you manage, and you were quite good in the past in really linking up with major government programs, and if you can make a breakthrough there, I think that will be really tremendous success.
my question is, because you deal very much on this municipality level, yeah, and direct level and construction, public services, we all need corruption is an issue. So how do you see the situation?
First of all, why it's different is because we had this program, because somebody in the government was so keen to say, yeah, we need a government program and we need to provide funding for this. So it's also two different things. Sometimes we have programs but we have no fundings. So the money is there in a way. So what to say about corruption? There is corruption. Yeah, we staying out of this. That's all I can say.
We are also struggling a little bit with the same thing. When you're scaling, when you're monitoring and evaluation becomes an issue. So what we are doing today is, maybe it's something also we can talk about together, is we are working with a company which has the IT platform in the cloud. So what happens is with smartphones, which most people have today, you can fill in questionnaires in local languages and upload them in the cloud. So we've actually done it for our evaluation survey. It was done by a German trained lady, so very rigorous. She put so many questions, and apparently it even can hold those. But the challenge really is, do you really want to see 20,000 or in your case 13,000 photographs in the cloud? Do you really want it? In our case 500,000 pictures of toilets. Who's going to look at it? So this is also under development. So we are talking to them, and maybe it's also as part of the partnership. We can also extend the talks to you and see how this can be tackled, because it's really a challenge, but it's also an opportunity, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm always open. We heard also about, or we thinking about this, what do you say, tablet thing in the field, but you know, then maybe you have no electricity. There are so many things you have to consider. You know, when you bring your phone and there is no chargeable things, stuff like that. Yeah, or you work on paper, but when you work on paper, you have the risk of failures when you type again. So direct typing versus paper typing. So we discussed a lot about this, but yeah, I'm open for new ideas.
Yeah, this database, wouldn't that be a task of the government? And are there plans to phase out, to hand it over? Because at one stage, BORDA might leave the country, and then are there any plans to hand it over to the government at one stage?
Yeah, I agree. It should be the task of the government. But if the governments would take their tasks, none of us would sit here. I think so. I mean, I worked in the ministry for wastewater, so I'm.
That's not an excuse. Sorry, you know.
No, it's not. I'm just saying.
We all know how the reality is still. It is a requirement. And the question is.
I'm not finished. This was the introduction.
At least a plan.
No. So I'm just saying. Actually, yes, I agree. It's the task of the government. So, but obviously, it's not done for whatever reasons. And of course, we are in discussion with the governments, and I said there is a demand, and the more they're getting aware of what we have, they want to have it. So, and I think we have no right to keep the data, of course, because it's community data. It's not our own data, right? We collect it. So, of course, sooner or later there will be a handover, if it's in a useful way. I mean, I do not want to give this all away, and then it's somewhere lost in a government office. So there needs to be a good approach.